Hi friends, are you, like me, a large boy? If so, this video is probably for you. If you're not a large boy, please stick around. If you knit for large boys, you might also find it interesting. And in this case, boy does refer to any person of any gender and any configuration thereof. Size inclusive knitwear. Let's talk about it. So this has been a topic that's been on the rise for the last few years, I'd say. Many designers are making an effort to be more size inclusive, which includes not only making larger sizes of designs, but also smaller sizes of designs. I know that there are many people in our community who struggle to find designs that are meant for adults that are small enough for their physical frames. And then there are those of us like me who often struggle to find patterns that are large enough for our physical frames. You'll notice that in a lot of older pattern books and even things from the early 2000s, the 2010s, they may have a range of patterns which only go up to a 48-inch chest. In this video, I am going to use the word chest and bust interchangeably. I'm going to use chest more often. Those of us who do not have breasts may not like having this part of our body referred to as a bust. So if I say chest, I mean bust. However, despite the fact that there are now more designs available in more sizes, that doesn't mean that we don't want to knit things that might not be designed to go up to our size. So in this video, I am going to walk you through how to take the best measurements to get the best finished garment for yourself. And that's not only measurements of yourself, but also figuring out the amount of ease, the amount of length, and other factors that go into a comfortable fitting garment. We're also going to talk about how to choose a pattern, how to read a pattern, how to figure out exactly how large a pattern already goes, and then we're going to talk about how to modify or adapt patterns that may not be as large as you want in order to add size to the areas that you need. One thing about larger bodies is that we do not scale at the same rate as smaller bodies. So it may be that part of your body fits into the pattern sizes and part of your body does not. So we're going to talk about that as well. This is going to be a bit of a longer one. There's going to be some math involved. There's going to be some diagrams. I hope you will stick with me. If you do have any further questions at the end of the video, please feel free to leave a comment below and I will try to answer them in a follow-up video. As always, if you have any suggestions for further topics you'd like to see covered, check out the suggestion box in the video description below, and let's get on with the tutorial. Alright guys, before we get into the video, I want to talk to you. Weight is a very difficult subject for a lot of people. I know for myself, I have always been overweight. I was a big kid, I grew up into a big adult, I developed an eating disorder at a very young age. Luckily, I am currently in recovery from that eating disorder, but part of that recovery involves appreciating my body at the size that it is. I've been knitting for probably 20 years at this point, 23 years, I would say. And it was only in the last few years that I've started knitting garments for myself, because before that, it was always, well, there's no point because I'm going to lose weight. There's no point because I'm going to lose weight. Like, it's no point wasting the effort on the body that I have now. Your body, the way that it is right now, is worth the effort of having nice things. If it's going to change shape in the future, to get larger or to get smaller, that's the future. Right now, your body deserves nice things. It deserves you to be nice to it. Okay? Weight is morally neutral. Size is morally neutral. I'm putting this tutorial out because I haven't seen anything like it. These are things that I had to learn and discover for myself through trial and error. And I'm hoping that they will help you as well. Parts of this process are going to be difficult for you, especially when you have to take your own measurements, especially when you have to do the math, especially when you have to look at these patterns that are designed for bodies that are not yours. So if you're having trouble in those moments, I want you to think about your body and all the awesome things it does. This chest, it is great for kitty cuddles. These arms, super strong for holding my wife. This hair, amazing. Think of all the good things your body has done for you. And that's what we're doing. We are giving our bodies, we are giving ourselves the gift of our own time, skill, and attention. Okay, I just wanted to cover that before we get into this. All right, come on guys, let's go. All right, so this is our first stop. I'm not going to tell you to go look at patterns first. We're going to start in our very own closets. Take a moment and look at what you already have, whether that's hand knit or commercially made, probably going to be commercially made, and see what you like about the fit. See what kind of neckline you like, see what kind of arm length you like, see what kind of silhouette you like, that kind of thing. And then what you're going to do is you're going to grab one shirt that is the most comfortable shirt that you own. It's the one that fits you the way you want this knitted garment to fit you. It makes you feel the way that you want this knitted garment to make you feel. Here's one I prepared earlier. We're going to be using this shirt, which is just a plain old waffle stitch Henley from Walmart that I've had for many, many years. And this is going to be our example shirt for the rest of the video on how to get your right measurements and how to figure out what design is going to work for you. Now, I tried my very damnedest to get all of this into the shot for you, but it's just not going to happen. So we're going to go with it. So what you're going to do is, for this section of your measurements, you're going to need a cat. You're going to take whatever piece of fabric of clothing that you decided that was your favorite, that fits you the best, that makes you feel good, and you're going to lay it out flat like this. Try and lay it out actually as flat as you can get it, because we're going to measure this. And we're basically going to use this as kind of the template for your knitted garment. Not for your body shape, but for the garment itself. So what you're going to do is lay it out flat. We're going to have to do this one in pieces. If you do it on the floor, you'll have a little bit more room. I have a quilting square that I like to use. However, as we are large boys, you'll probably need a measuring tape as well. The last thing you're going to need is something to write on. Now, I usually like to start by drawing myself a little diagram of whatever I am measuring. I'm just a visual person. This works better for me than trying to remember what part is the upper arm and what part is the lower arm. What did I label this as? All right, so there's going to be our little diagram. Now what you're going to do is you're going to measure all of the points that you would need to match up against a knitting pattern. So often this is the chest size, the chest width, or the center back measurement, the armhole depth, and then the depth from the underarm to the end of the piece, and then the sleeve length from the underarm to the wrist. So we're just going to go through, we're going to measure each of those individually. Do not worry about how you think these pieces match your actual physical measurements. We're measuring the shirt. We are not measuring ourselves, we're measuring the shirt. So first I'm going to do, so the shoulder, it's a little bit sloped on this piece, as you can see. We're going to measure the shoulder from the shoulder to the underarm. It's going to be 12 inches. So on my little note here, I'm going to mark 12 inches. The cross back, or the width of the bust, because this is a straight shirt with no shaping, is going to be from one underarm to the other. And it is measuring at 26.5 inches. The next measurement I'm going to take is from the underarm to the lower hem. You'll notice that I am adjusting the fabric as I go. Do not stretch it out of place. Just kind of pat it flat as it would fall on your body. So that is going to be 17 inches. The other measurement that I like to take, you're not going to be able to see this whole one on the video, but I like to go from the shoulder to the bottom of the hem, so the entire length of the piece. For me, that's 28 inches. This I find a very important measurement because depending on the style of the sweater, the underarm or the yoke may fall lower on your body. So if the yoke comes down, say, to this point on the garment as opposed to this point on the garment, you don't want to do 17 inches from this point because that'll make it too long. You want to make sure that the full garment is still 28 inches long. So the next couple I'm going to do, I'm going to have to move this around a little bit. I'm going to do the arm length from the underarm to the end of the cuff width, and then finally the collar width. All right, so those are the basic measurements that you're going to take. Now, the great thing about doing it with this method is A, you don't have to struggle with measuring your own body, and B, it's a really easy way to get measurements for your friends. So what you can do, especially if your friends are not close friends, family members, whoever you're making a sweater for, if you're not physically close to their location, what you can do is ask them to do this exact same exercise. Choose a piece of clothing that fits the way that they want their finished item to fit, have them lay it out flat, and take a picture of it laid out flat. Send you the picture, and then you, using Microsoft Paint, something, photo editor, draw on the lines, on the actual photo itself, draw the lines of where you need them to measure, which point you need to measure, and then label them, A, B, C, D, etc. Takes all the guesswork out of their measurements for them. They don't have to guess how far up their body they need to measure their bust, if they need to be wearing a bra or not, what the hip measurement is, if it should be your natural waist or your actual waist. Measure the shirt. It's going to be a lot simpler for you. So send the picture back to them with the labeled lines, have them measure those lines, and then send those measurements back to you. And then you've basically got a labeled diagram for your friend. Nice and easy, and away you go. Measuring yourself sucks. It does, especially if you are a big boy. However, there are two measurements that I think are crucial in determining the amount of ease that you find comfortable in a knitted garment, and that is your chest measurement and your hip measurement. Not your waist, your hips. So you can get both of these measurements yourself. It's easier if you have a friend. But if you are the size that I am, you will run into an issue in that most standard tape measures only go up to 60 inches. I can tell you right now, these bad boys are more than 60 inches. So you're going to have to do a little bit of creative measuring. This is where having a second pair of hands or a friend really comes in handy. The other thing you can do is, if you're in a good-sized town or a city, find yourself a dry cleaner that offers on-site alterations. Because usually they have someone in the store who is a tailor, a seamstress, a tailor, a sewist, someone who knows what they're doing. And you can ask them to take your measurements for you. They might charge a small fee for doing this. They might do it for free. It kind of depends on the dry cleaner. Just be polite when you ask, because some of them might not have done that for someone before, but just explain, you know, I'm a knitter, I'm trying to knit something for myself, it's difficult to get my measurements. If you're doing this, it is a good idea to get your entire set of measurements done, because they can do it professionally, they know what they're doing, and it's a lot easier for you to do them all in one go. So If you do that, I would suggest getting things like your upper arm, your cross chest, everything, top to bottom, all the measurements. But for now, I'm going to do my hips. So you can see that my measuring tape does not completely go. So 60 inches is, so I'm measuring across the widest point of my body. This is my hips. There are hip bones under there somewhere. So it's going to be slightly below your waist, including your butt and including the widest part of your stomach. So we're just going to lay this here. Don't suck in. Sucking in is just going to mess you up in the end. It's going to be tempting, especially when you're looking down. You're automatically doing this motion. So try not to suck in. Try not to tighten. So 60 inches is here. 1 inch is here. I'm going to kind of shimmy. That didn't work as well. Okay. So 67 inches. We've got 67 inches for the widest part of my body. Next, I'm going to do the widest part of my chest. If you are a person with breasts who wears a bra on a regular basis and you're planning on wearing a bra with this knitted piece, put your bra on. I'm sorry. I'm sorry that you have to do this, but it's going to get you the most accurate measurement. So you're going to go, again, if you are a person who wears a bra, right where your bra strap's going to go, right around the widest part. And you're going to, again, don't tighten it, don't suck in, don't flex. And I am just at 56.5 inches. So as you can see, there's a 10-inch difference between my chest measurement and my hip measurement, and that's going to be really good to know going forward. The last measurement that we need to take, I know I said we're only doing 2, we're doing 3. Sorry about that. You need to know how large your upper arm is. This boy. And you need to know honestly how large this is. A lot of pattern designers will scale up for larger sizes without taking into account that larger people often have a larger amount of skin proportionately in this area than thinner people. So the actual hole, the arm hole, has to be large enough to go around this entire part of your body. If it is not, if it's cutting in like that, the shirt's going to be uncomfortable, you're not going to wear it. So this is probably the most upsetting part for me, to take this measurement and then to have to modify the pattern. However, it's also the thing that's going to make it fit the best. So what you want to do is you want to take your tape measure again. And this part will be easier if you have a friend, because you can just hold your arm out. What you're going to do, if you're working by yourself, drape it over like that. Do not tighten. We're not taking it like this. You need to be honest here, or the sweater's just not going to fit. So keep it loose. You don't even want it snug against your skin. You want it loose. So right now we're looking at 24 inches. So that is my upper arm measurement. I want you to think of the last time that you saw a knitting pattern that went up to 24 inches in the upper arm. Oh wait. Now think of the last time you found a knitting pattern for a 56-inch chest and how large the upper arm was for that pattern. I can guarantee it's going to be about 20 to 22 inches at most. So those are the 3 measurements that you need to take. Grab a buddy if you need to. Go find some professional help if you need to. Otherwise, I will see you back at the math section. All right, so let's talk about choosing a pattern. Now, you may have a pattern in mind, something that you are excited to make, something that you really want to make, but you're not sure if it's going to work for your body, for your size. So the first thing we're going to do is I'm going to walk you through reading pattern measurements. I'm going to use some excerpts from different patterns. I'm going to put the visuals over here, so hopefully that you can get an idea of what I'm talking about. I will not show pattern details, like actual pattern directions for paid patterns, because obviously those are paid patterns, but I will be showing some just measurement sections, some schematics, things like that, to help walk you through this. So now that you know how big of a boy you are, it's time to translate that into pattern measurements. Now, unfortunately, measurements are not standardized across patterns. There is no set way that designers have to list their measurements. There is no set range of measurements for certain sizes. The Craft Yarn Council does have some guidelines which many people use to design, myself included. However, it's really individual by the designer. So you have to read this section very, very carefully. Now, usually, or I shouldn't say usually, but hopefully the designer will provide the measurements in the pattern description, so you can take a look before you even purchase the pattern. But generally, you could get measurements in 3 different formats. Sometimes you'll get all 3 formats, sometimes you'll get 2 of them. Most times you'll just get 1 of them, and it's important to know which one it is and how to read it for your shape. So the first one that you can get is the finished garment measurements, and this is the measurements of the actual garment as it is finished, so that includes the size of your body plus ease. Now usually this will be listed. It will say finished garment, finished measurements, something like that in the description. If it doesn't, you can match up the measurements listed with a schematic if it does have a schematic. For example, this is the finished garment measurements for a Jessie Maid pattern, and below it she lists the second set of measurements, which is the chest measurements. So you can see that these 2 sets of measurements are different, and that is because of ease. And I'll talk about ease in just a minute here. So often designers will use the chest measurement, and this is the actual measurement of your physical body. This is not the measurement of your shirt, it is the measurement of your body. This may or may not include ease. It's up to the designer to list how much ease is included. And sometimes they will actually say this is intended for a chest measurement X with X inches of intended ease, which is kind of my third category of how to list measurements. So just the chest measurement, it may or may not include ease. You may have to add extra ease in order to make it comfortable for you. So I've said the word ease a whole bunch. So what is ease? Ease is basically the amount of extra fabric, or the amount that the fabric has to stretch in order to fit your physical body. So it's the amount either larger or smaller that the garment is than your body. Negative ease is when the garment is smaller than your body and will have to stretch to fit. Some things that have negative ease, that we want to have negative ease, are things like socks, hats. We want them to be slightly smaller than the body part that they're going on so that they'll stretch and fit and be snug. Some people do like this in their shirts. A lot of Jessie Maid designs rely on negative ease to get that kind of shaping. And she often uses things like rib and different stitch patterns to achieve that really stretchy amount of ease. So you can see again in the same example, the chest measurement of the person is a good 5 or 6 inches larger than the finished garment measurement. So negative ease will be a few inches smaller than your physical body, so the garment will have to stretch. No ease means that the piece of fabric is the exact size as your body. It will not stretch, it will not be loose, it fits. It is what it is. Positive ease is when the garment is larger than your body. And for many people, we like a little bit of positive ease. I especially espouse having positive ease in the around the armholes, just to give yourself a little bit of extra space, a little bit of extra relaxation. Ease will be shown in inches, and that is how much extra space you have around the entire circumference of your body. So, for example, my favorite shirt measures 26.5 inches at the widest point, which means that it is 53 inches around at the chest. My chest, as we found out, measures 57 inches. So my favorite shirt has 4 inches of negative ease, which means that it stretches slightly to fit me, which is good. It means that I don't mind a little bit of negative ease around my chest and my waist in order to be comfortable, depending on the fabric. If the fabric is stretchy and loose enough, a little bit of negative ease will work for me. If the fabric is very stiff and does not stretch easily, negative ease will just make it really tight and uncomfortable. How much ease you personally like is wildly up to you, your style, your level of comfort, the pattern, the style of clothing that the pattern is. However, keep in mind that style is designed for a lot of ease. Things like, for example, Joji Locatelli's Boxy series. The amount of ease for that to be comfortable and look good on larger bodies is not the same as the amount of ease for smaller bodies. So it doesn't scale evenly, but it's entirely up to you and how much ease you want, which is why I do suggest that you measure an existing item of clothing that you own to see how much ease is there already, so that you can have an idea of how much ease to build into your knitted garments. So you have to take a look at the measurements that the pattern provides, whether that's finished garment measurements, chest measurements with an unknown amount of ease, or chest measurements with a recommended amount of ease, and make sure that whichever one you choose is going to have the amount of ease that you personally like. It is difficult to scale. I do not blame any designer who messes this up. I'm sure that I've messed it up in the past. It is not humanly possible to measure, design, and test for every single size, especially for smaller designers like myself who can't afford to pay for testers, can't afford to pay for yarn support, and is just relying on a very generous community. When I design for my size, which is 57-inch chest. And then I will use the measurements, the stitch counts for the garment that fits me, and I will use math to increase that to a couple sizes larger and decrease that to several sizes smaller. The problem is that bodies don't scale at the same rate in every place, especially large bodies. And bodies don't scale the same as each other. And you can see this, for example, in me, I have a 10-inch difference between my chest and my hips. In other people, that ratio is reversed. In other people, that ratio is greatly exaggerated. In other people, that ratio is exactly the same. And that just depends on your personal body, especially in the upper arms and the neck. I found that patterns that are just based on pure math, often they will have very large boat necks and very skinny arms. And that is because people are using the CYC guidelines, which, again, I use myself. I do not blame designers for using them, but they might not be accurate to your body shape. So it is frustrating to have to do extra homework. I completely agree. Especially if you paid for a pattern so that you didn't have to do extra homework and then you get it and you realize that you do. I hope that the trend of truly size-inclusive designing continues so that we have to do less and less homework with the newer patterns that come out. However, we might want to work on older patterns. We might want to work on vintage patterns. We might want to work on, and here I'm saying vintage, like even the early 2000s, there was very limited pattern sizes available. So it's good to know how to modify and adjust patterns in order to fit you. So let's talk about some ways to modify patterns. The first thing you are going to have to do, so you've gotten your measurements, you have a pattern in mind that you like. At this point, you may be stuck on this pattern. However, depending on the next step, you may have to choose a different pattern. And that next step is the worst one in this entire process, and that is swatching. You have to swatch. I'm sorry, but you do. If you have a large body or one that is not typically shaped, you have to swatch. I'm so sorry to bring you this bad news. I'm terrible at swatching. I don't like swatching. I was going to show you a few of my swatches, but I actually threw them all out. So I generally cast on about 20 stitches and then knit about 2 inches of fabric, and call it a day. Conventional wisdom and the best way to do it is to cast on the number of stitches to make a 5 by 5 square in the pattern stitch, cast off, wash it, and block it as you are planning to do with your finished garment. That is what I am telling you to do. Do not do what I do. Because your gauge will change with washing and blocking, especially depending on the yarn that you choose. I use a lot of acrylic, which does not change gauge very often on washing and blocking, so I can kind of skip that step. When I did start a garment out of merino, I did wash and block my swatch purely because it was a fiber I wasn't familiar with. So if you're very familiar with the fiber and you feel like you can get away without washing and blocking, go ahead. But you definitely need a very accurate stitch per inch count. We're going to have to do a lot of math. And I'm going to try and walk you through the math as well as I can by showing examples here on the screen. But basically, the first thing you have to do once you have your gauge and your suggested pattern is figure out what pattern size you need to modify, and do that by looking at the pinch points. So I always look at the amount of stitches around the hips and the amount of stitches around the chest. I know that I can adjust upper arms, and I know that I'm probably going to have to adjust the upper arms. So I look at the number of stitches around the chest. If you look at a pattern, this is probably going to be in one of two places. If it's a top-down pattern, it's going to be at the section labeled splitting for sleeves. And it'll probably look something like this. It'll say, slip X number to holder for sleeves, knit this number, slip X number sleeves holder, knit X number. And then hopefully at the end, you'll get a nice thing in brackets saying body X number of stitches. Keep in mind that you will have to cast on extra stitches for the underarm. And I usually cast on more stitches for the underarm than the pattern calls for. I usually cast on about 4 inches worth of extra stitches at the underarm, because I've had that be a big pinch point for myself. But just go according to the pattern for the moment. So figure out how many stitches around you would need. So if you have a 57-inch chest, as I do, and I want to knit this pattern with 3 inches of extra ease, I need 60 inches worth of stitches around. If my gauge is, say, 5 stitches per inch, I would need 300 stitches for the body. So then I would go to my pattern and I would look, and I would see which size has 300 stitches for the body. And that's the size that I would start with. So you're working backwards from your pinch points. You're taking the number of stitches you would need to cover your body at the amount of ease that you would like, and working backwards to match that up with the pattern, instead of working forwards from what the pattern says the measurements will be and going according to those stitch counts. Sometimes this will be the largest size, sometimes it will be a size down. It could be a few sizes down, which will be very surprising, and you'll be like, surely that can't be right. But double check your ease, double check your swatch, double check your math, and sometimes it'll fit you. I promise it'll be okay. If you're working this bottom up, the number is going to be even easier to find. Some patterns will have you cast on a certain number for the ribbing and then increase or decrease for the actual body itself. So make sure that you're checking that. So look at the cast on number And then look at the instructions after the ribbing and see if there is a different number for the body stitches. And then you can just calculate those around. You don't have to add extra for the underarm because those body stitches are already included because those get cast off when you reach the underarm. All right, so you have the pinch points. You know how many stitches around that you need your garment to be. However, none of those sizes are listed in the pattern. Now, this is when we need to do some modifications to actually figure out our starting numbers. So one thing you can do is just go for a larger gauge. And this often happens with me. For example, in my Stellar Sailor, I swatched and my gauge was significantly larger than the listed gauge in the pattern. I did this exact same math process. I figured out how many stitches around I would need at the underarms and around at the hips, worked backwards from there, and discovered that at my larger gauge I would be able to cast on a size 6 as opposed to the size 9 that I would be if I had gotten gauge. So that is one really easy way of modifying a pattern to fit you width-wise, is using larger needles, larger gauge, and following the instructions for a smaller size. However, that doesn't always work out. There are 2 other basic methods of modifying a pattern to fit a larger body. The first one is by adding motifs. So this especially applies to cabled sweaters or Fair Isle sweaters, anything that has like a repeating motif around, especially round yoke sweaters. And this may be the easiest way to increase the size. I found that increasing the size on a round yoke sweater is quite easy because you have to do less figuring out at the beginning for how to accommodate your upper arms, as opposed to, say, a raglan sweater, but I'm going to get into all of that in a few minutes. I've also used this in cabled sweaters by repeating motifs or even by adding extra stitches between motifs. In many cabled sweaters, there's a column of pearl stitches. Adding a couple of pearl stitches here and there, it may give you that extra ease that you need while not interrupting the look of the garment too much. The third method I'm actually not that familiar with. I have a relatively straight shape, and in my shape I prefer having a looser fit around my chest, so I don't mind a straight shape. So I don't have much personal experience with this, but adding darts and panels can also be another method of modifying to add more space in certain areas. So darts, panels, and short rows are all different methods of basically strategically adding extra fabric to certain sections of the garment without affecting other sections of the garment. One example of this is that I have done is my DJ Music Man pullover. The sleeves were too tight, but I had already done them in the round Steatham checkerboard pattern. It was a whole thing, and I didn't want to have to redo them. So what I did was I just knitted this white strip and inserted that into the seam, basically widening it. You can use this method on sleeves. You can use it at the side, in underarms, just adding an extra panel of fabric. And you could do this after the fact by steeking, or even just by casting on or adding extra stitches in the course of making the garment. Darts. This is more common in sewing, but this is when you add basically a triangle-shaped area of fabric to widen that area. Again, I'm not super familiar with this, and often short rows are used. Community member Potato Shoe used short rows to add extra room around the waist of a piece, which I thought was really ingenious, because I've always heard short rows used to increase for the bust, if you are a busty person. but using short rows to basically add some height, some length around the stomach is also a fantastic idea. I will include some resources in the description with more information on short row shaping and darts, just because, like I said, I'm not super familiar with them. One person who is very good at short row shaping, especially around the bust, is Jessie Maid. If you want to check out Jessie Maid Designs, her work includes a lot of that short row shaping. Another common method of fitting the garment is using increases and decreases to shape the waist. You've probably seen this in many garments before. It creates kind of an hourglass shape if you do even increases or decreases. But you can, of course, increase or decrease at a rate that makes sense for your body. For example, for mine, I would want to have a start here, go down, go in a little bit for my natural waist, and then go wider out to accommodate my hips. You can also do an A-line shape. An A-line shape would actually be good for me if I didn't mind, if I didn't like having this extra fabric around here. So an A-line shape is accomplished by basically starting at the underarms. You increase gradually out towards the hips. So if I were doing something with 0 ease, I would start around my my chest with 57 inches of fabric, and I would slowly, over the course of 18 inches, which is my length from my underarm to my hem, over the course of 18 inches, I would add 10 inches of fabric, if that makes sense. So in that case, what you would do is you would, again, do some math. If I'm trying to increase, again, let's say my stitch gauge is 5 stitches per inch, I want to add 10 inches of fabric, I want to add 50 stitches, I want to add 50 stitches over 18 inches. Let's say that my row gauge is 7 stitches per inch. Let's cut off 2 inches for the rib because we don't want to increase in the rib. So that's 16. So 7 times 16 is 112. If I'm increasing 50 stitches over 112 rows, that is 1 stitch every 2 rows-ish, with maybe 6 rows at the top, at the underarms and above the hem. So in that case, I would probably do, I would increase 1 at each side every 4 rows, as opposed to 1 stitch every 2 rows, which would make the stitch count uneven. I'd increase 2 stitches every 4 rows, or you could do 4 stitches every 8 rows. So you just figure it out that way. Alright, so the last part of the video is I'm going to take you through some concrete examples of the things that I've been talking about. Now, I haven't had enough experience with saddle shoulders or set-in shoulders to be able to give you any advice on those particular shapes. However, I'm going to go through a round yoke, a raglan, and then a boxy. So the round yoke and the raglan are top down. The boxy can be bottom up or top down. It's up to you. So the first one I'm going to show you is a round yoke. So you may be familiar with my field sweater. As you can see, it's not completely finished yet. However, I have finished the yoke and tried it on, and the yoke fits. So this is going to be the one that I'm going to be talking about as my example. And I am going to walk you through every step of the math that I did in order to resize this for my particular size. And also early is here. So I find round yoke sweaters to be the easiest to modify and also the easiest to fudge. Now, a round yoke is constructed in one of 2 ways. It's either constructed in very narrow wedges, which create, it's not technically round, it's more like a 32-sided figure, or as a pie. So the method that I'm going to be talking about is when it is constructed in wedges, as that is what I did on the field sweater. And this method is going to work for pretty much anything that has a repeating motif around the yoke. So for the field sweater, my gauge is 4.5 stitches per inch, and my body dimensions are 67 inches for the body and 24 inches for each upper arm. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to calculate how many inches around I need my finished yoke to be, because at the point where you split for the sleeves, which is what I refer to as the pinch point or the point of reference, the sleeve has to go around both arms and around your entire body. So let's do some math. So that's 67 plus 24 plus 24 is 115 inches. However, I'm going to add a little bit of ease to each of my upper arms. I'm just going to add 1 inch per sleeve. I'm not going to add any ease for my body shape because the 67 inches is my hips, whereas the 67 inches is my hips. Leaving it at 67 inches gives me 10 inches of ease around my chest, so I like that. So we're going to do 115 plus 1 inch of ease per sleeve. Most people have 2 arms. If you have a different number of arms, please take that into account. So that's going to be 117 inches. Now at this point we have to take into account that you will be casting on extra stitches for the underarms. So this depends on how many stitches you cast on for the underarms. I like to cast on about 4 inches of extra fabric for each underarm. We're going to remove 4 inches of fabric per underarm from our calculations. So 4 times 4 is 16. So 117 minus 16 is 101 inches. So the first thing I'm going to do is, so 101 inches is how large around my yoke needs to be in order to fully fit my chest and my upper arms. Now multiply that by my gauge of 4.5 stitches per inch, which means that I have to have on the needle 454.5 stitches. So we're going to say around 454 to 455 as a rough estimate. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take a look at my pattern because I did work this at a different gauge. So the first thing I'm going to check and see if any of the pattern sizes list 454 stitches as the measurement for the point before you split for the sleeves. This might take a little bit of digging on some patterns, but look for the point where you separate for the sleeves. The total number of stitches in the yoke will probably be above that, or if necessary, you'll have to calculate because the pattern will say put X number on hold for the sleeve, knit X for the front, X for the sleeve, X for the front, so you just have to add those 4 numbers together. Now looking at the field sweater, the largest size is 384 stitches at this point, which is not going to be large enough for me, which means that we are going to move into the next portion of the math, which is to figure out how many of the wedges we need to knit in order to fit our body. So each wedge it's not triangular, it's more of a trapezoid shape. This pattern tells us that the top of the trapezoid is 5 stitches wide, but it doesn't tell us how wide the bottom of each trapezoid is. So I'm looking at the pattern, and there's 384 stitches after all of the yoke increases. If I look at the beginning of the pattern, the largest size says to cast on for 32 repeats of the wedges. So we know there's 32 wedges. The top of the wedge is 5 stitches. All we have to do is divide 384 by 32 wedges to find out how many stitches are at the bottom, which is 12. Now, if we were to divide 454 stitches by 12, we get 37.8. So that means we need either 37 or 38 wedges in order to fit our body. I would go for 38 just to give myself a little bit of extra wiggle room. So we know that we need to make 38 wedges. Working backwards, 38 times 5 is 190. So we need to start our yoke design at 190 stitches, which is a lot. So coming back to my sweater here, you can see that this neckline is quite wide, like very wide. I don't like it, honestly. I wish I had cast on fewer stitches and done more increase rounds to reach that 190 stitches I need to start the pattern. So for the collar, what I would recommend in this case is casting on a smaller number, so either the number recommended in the pattern for the larger sizes. In this pattern, it does recommend 112 stitches for each of the largest sizes, and then using my increase rounds to bring it up rapidly to the 190 stitches. You don't need to do it slowly and evenly, you can do it quite rapidly. So I would do maybe 1 to 3 increase rounds separated by a row of stockinette, and that way you don't get a huge band of just plain stockinette at the top of your sweater. The other thing you can do, which is what I wish I had done with this, is cast on provisionally, because as you can see, my ribbing is quite narrow, which I don't like that look either, but I was impatient, so I only did narrow ribbing. I would cast on provisionally the 190 stitches, knit the yoke, knit the rest of the sweater, try it on, and then knit the collar. So take those provisional stitches, put them back on the needle, and do your decreases towards your neck instead of increases away from your neck until you can get the perfect fit. I think that this is just a better method for getting a well-fitting collar than doing the collar first, because once the rest of the sweater is knit, it might hang differently, the weight of the fabric, the folds of the fabric. You're not quite sure how it's going to fit your shape until you actually have it finished and you can try it on. So back to our math. So working ahead, we have figured out how many stitches we need to cast on. We figured out how many wedges we need to knit. We've finished our yoke. It is time to split for the sleeves. So in order to calculate the sleeve split, this is why I like round yokes, because you can split the sleeves wherever and it's not going to impact the patterning of the yoke in most cases. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my sleeve measurement of 24 inches plus 1, 25, minus 4 for the underarm, and multiply that by 4.5 to get the number of stitches that I need for each sleeve. And I am going to figure out how many stitches I need for the front and the back by taking my body measurement of 67 inches, dividing by 2, which is 33.5, subtracting 4, because there are going to be 2 underarms for the body. So that's 29.5 for the front and the back, multiplied by 4.5, my gauge, 132.75. So this is where you do a little bit of fudging to make sure that your numbers work out and that they all add up to your total number of yoke stitches. Do not forget to cast on your underarm stitches according to the numbers that you used in the math earlier. So I used 4 inches, which means at 4.5 stitches per inch, I need to cast on 18 stitches at each underarm. That's very important not to forget, or else it's going to throw off all the rest of your calculations. So keep copious notes while you're doing this process. So the next shape I'm going to show you is a top-down raglan. Now raglans follow the same basic principle as a round yoke, but there are only 4 wedges and they increase at a set fixed rate of 2 stitches per wedge every other row, which actually makes your math pretty easy, which is 8 stitches per every other row or 4 stitches per row. So just remember that number, 4 stitches per row. The difficulty in a raglan is that because the increases are at fixed points, you need to do a bit more math when working backwards. So again, we're going to start at our underarm or our pinch point, but instead of calculating the number of stitches around both your upper arms and your body, you're going to calculate each area individually. So you're going to do your body as one set of measurements and your upper arm as a second set of measurements. Basically, it's the same thing. You're going to calculate how many stitches do you need for each sleeve to be at the end of the yoke. How many stitches do you need each back and front to be at the end of the yoke? And then we're going to work backwards to how many stitches you need to cast on. So I didn't keep as detailed notes for this, so I'm going to give you the formula without the actual numbers in this case. But basically what you need for this calculation is your, let's say that we're doing it for the sleeve. So you need your upper arm measurement plus whatever intended ease you have, minus however many you're going to cast on for the underarm. That's going to get you the amount in inches around that, or across in this case, that this section of the raglan has to be. Now the rate of decrease in this particular wedge is 2 stitches every other round, or 1 stitch per round, which is easy to remember. The next thing you're going to need is your row gauge and your yoke depth. Basically, you have the length of your yoke to increase from your collar to your finished upper arm measurement. So take your number of rows per inch, multiply that by your yoke depth, and that's how many rows you have to decrease. Subtract that number from your stitch count across the bottom of the upper arm raglan wedge, and you'll get the number that you need to start your raglan wedge with. Do this for each of the 4 sections, and that'll give you your cast on number. Now this may be, again, a larger number than is comfortable for your collar, in which case I would recommend, again, casting on a smaller number, doing some rapid increase rounds, and then placing your markers and starting your raglan increases. Or again, you can start here by casting on this number, make the rest of your sweater, and then go back and pick up the collar stitches. Whatever you are most comfortable with. The Chucky sweater, I actually did the second method. I calculated how many stitches each wedge would need. I actually calculated how many color stripes I would need because I wanted to keep it even. In order to get my yoke depth, I cast on exactly that number, and then I went back at the end and picked up for this folded stockinette collar. You can kind of vaguely see, not really, you can't see it all, but I did pick up fewer stitches than was actually around, so that it brings in the collar and it sits quite nicely. So the reason that I recommend doing the math for each section of the raglan individually is because most standard raglan patterns may not take into account the disproportionate upper arm to the chest measurement. So just to make sure you're going to fit those upper arms correctly, make sure that you do the calculation for each size independently. If you are working from a pattern and you see that you can actually use the numbers provided in the pattern for your size, just make sure that you keep note of, say you're working a size 6 for the front and the back and a size 8 for the sleeves. Just be aware of that as you're going. All right, the final shape that I'm going to talk about is my absolute favorite shape to wear. And it's also the easiest to modify because it's the most basic sweater shape that exists, which I'm glad that it's my favorite. So this is a boxy. So there is no shaping whatsoever. This is a drop shoulder. You're basically knitting 2 squares and 2 trapezoids. And I find that this shape fits me really well. So trapezoids or parallelograms? I think trapezoids. Rhombuses? So all you're going to do is you're going to take your stitch gauge and your either body measurements or the finished garment measurements or your body measurements plus intended ease. You are going to create a rectangle. The top is going to be the width of your underarm. Sorry. The top of the rectangle is going to be your chest. The bottom of the rectangle is going to be your hips. This could also be a trapezoid if you wanted to. I keep mine a rectangle. At the top of the front, you want to make sure that you drop down. I usually go about 3 inches to create the collar. You can measure how wide you want your collar to be, again, against your favorite shirt, or you can do a simple thirds calculation, so 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 for the collar and the upper arms. Since I usually do a 30-inch wide piece of fabric at the top, I usually do 10 inches, 10 inches, 10 inches. And then my collar ribbing will tighten up the collar a little bit more. I give my collars a little bit of a shape by using increases and decreases. However, you could also use short rows to do that shaping. It's totally up to you how comfortable you are with short rows. For the sleeves, you want to create a trapezoid, rhombus, parallelogram, trapezoid with the widest point being your upper arm plus ease, with the smallest point being your wrist. You can use your row gauge to calculate again how many increases and decreases and the rate of increase and decrease that you need to use. This math can be a little bit more tricky. I've included a link in the description to a knitting calculator site, which will actually calculate sleeve decreases. You put in the number of rows that you have available for your decreases. So that would be the length of your sleeve times your row gauge. And then how many stitches you would like to decrease. So that would be the number of stitches around at the top of the sleeve, subtract the number of stitches around at the wrist. And that gets you how many stitches you need to increase or decrease, depending on which way you're going. You can knit the sleeves separately and then sew everything together. You can also do the body, leaving a hole for the underarm, and then making sure that you leave a large enough hole for your particular underarm, and then pick up and knit the sleeves from that point. The thing about boxies is that usually there aren't extra stitches cast on for the underarm. So in my case, this works out pretty well with a drop shoulder, as my yoke depth is 12 inches and my upper arm is 24 inches. It works out perfectly. However, with a drop shoulder, when you're wearing it, your actual shoulder is up here and the shoulder of the garment is actually lower down on your arm. So you can get away with a slightly smaller measurement. If you're doing quite a wide boxy where the drop shoulder would be down at your elbow, make sure that you are calculating the circumference of your elbow for the sleeve and not the circumference of your upper arm. And if you are doing a large boxy like that, your sleeve length obviously isn't going to be 20 inches from your underarm. It's going to be from your wrist up to wherever the drop sleeve is going to start on you. All right, I think I've covered everything that I wanted to cover in this video. It's been a bit of a long one. It's been a difficult one to film. Thank you to everyone who has been eagerly anticipating this video and who has been listening to me talk about it for literal months. But it's here now. I hope that you found it interesting. I hope that you found it educational. I hope that you found it helpful. And I most of all hope that I have inspired you to make something for yourself. Make something for your wonderful body the way that it is right now. Something that's going to fit, something that is comfortable for you, and most importantly, something that is going to spark joy, something that is going to make you happy. And I find that wearing my own hand knit sweaters makes me intensely happy. And I wish that same happiness for you. All right, so there are going to be some links in the description to helpful calculators, things like that. Otherwise, if you have any further questions, please leave them down in the comments, or you can use the suggestion box, which is also linked in the comments below. And I review that frequently to see if anyone has any video ideas, any larger questions that they would like a more in-depth answer to. And as well, if you need more specific guided help, the best place on the internet for crafty help, in my opinion, is our Discord server. The link to join is down in the bottom. We have so many talented crafters across so many different disciplines. I truly believe that if you have a question about something, there's someone in our server who has the answer and is happy to help you with it. All right, so that's going to be everything, my friends. Thank you so much for joining me. Please leave a like, please leave a comment, and I will see you in the coffee shop. I will see you in the live streams. I will see you in the Discord, but most importantly, my friends, I will see you in my heart. All right. Bye, guys. Bye.